Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Jessee, and I am a member of the amazing team of the Margo F. Souza Student Leadership Center at the University of California, Merced, also known as UC Merced. And I have the pleasure of welcoming you to SWAG, Sharing Wisdom Across Generations, an event about leadership and community engagement in the Central Valley, an event that celebrates and centers around the idea that every generation can learn from every generation. Now, this event is being brought to you by the Margo F. Souza Student Leadership Center. I believe we have Margo listening in. Hello, Margo. As well as the Community Engagement Center here at UC Merced. And we have a fantastic panel of community leaders that we're going to be introducing you all to. But first, I am excited to kick it over to my dear colleague, Burnett Doty of the Community Engagement Center, who will share a few words before we introduce our panelists. Burnett.
Thanks, Jess. And again, welcome to everyone. We are so glad that you've chosen to join us today, and look forward to hearing all of your feedback from this. I think what's going to be a really fun and exciting opportunity to share wisdom across generations. And one of the reasons that for the Community Engagement Center, we felt really honored to be able to co-sponsor this is because that really is built into when we get out and we participate in our community, when we bring new wisdom and enthusiasm and it bumps up against experience and practical engagement, it just works in this synergistic way to create positive change in our community. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to listen to how this can work, to learn from each other, and to take this out into our wider community. So again, thank you all for being here, and thank you for allowing us to participate in this event together.
Thank you so much, Burnett. And now I'm really excited to introduce our amazing panel of community leaders. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves, and then we will get started with our first question. I do want to do some logistics very quickly. For those of you watching, please know that this is recorded and will be uploaded to the Margo F. Souza Student Leadership Center YouTube channel. We also have our Q&A, so please know that if you have a question, you can drop it in the Q&A. In addition, you can also, if you would like live transcription, you can do that as well. That is an option in the menu. And last, if you want to just chat, if you're enjoying the conversation, if you want to add to the conversation, if you agree with something a panelist says, please, we love to see engagement in the chat. So know that you can engage in the chat, participate. The chat is open to all participants, so know that that is a great way to engage, and we hope that you will do so as we start this conversation. Now, I would like to introduce our three panelists, and first we'll have Chia introduce herself.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, the audience, for joining us today for such a amazing and important event, especially during a time where, you know, our leaders are and the communities can play a crucial role in bridging the gaps between generations. So this is a really important event. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel. My name is Chia Thao. I am a graduate student with the Departments of Public Health here at UC Merced. Prior to joining UC Merced, I work in the community for a long time and then become a lecturer at Fresno State, where I really learned that my passion is teaching. And so I thought, you know, I would love to pursue this journey. And now I am at UC Merced 5 years later. This is my last year at UC Merced. So I'm excited that UC Merced is here and it's providing the opportunities for students and community members and leaders who would like to really make an impact here in the communities. UC Merced, it's special for me. I grew up here in the Central Valley, specifically in Fresno, but I commute to Merced during the time that I was still, during my, when I was still have classes. And so currently I am also involved with different community organizations. I am the current board member for a local nonprofit agency called Elder Abuse Services, Inc., which is we advocate for elder abuse here in the Central Valley. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you, Jessee.
Thank you, Chia. And as our panelists introduce themselves, I will be dropping their bios in the chat for every one of you as well. We cannot cover all the amazing things they've all done in these short intros, so I want to highlight that. So thank you so much, Chia. Mindy, let's have Mindy introduce herself. Hello, Mindy.
Hi, everybody. I'm probably a long-term Mercedian now of the panel, in that I've lived here with my family for over 8 years. We moved here just over 8 years ago. And one of the first things I did when I got here was look for opportunities to connect in the community. I was very lucky to be introduced to University Friends Circle. And I got involved, and after a year or so, I got onto the board and have performed many different roles and worn different hats. I was a president. I've been a special events coordinator, a fundraiser, and we're doing everything that we can with University Friends Circle, you'll hear me call it UFC, to connect the community to the university and the university to the community. And I'm also involved in other boards of directors and other areas here in Merced. And I'm retired, and I'm retired from a career where I worked with a lot of people and organized a lot of people to do some pretty wonderful things. So I'm really happy to be here in Merced, and I hope to be able to help do that here.
Thank you so much, Mindy, for being here. Now, we'd love to introduce Jessee.
Hi, thank you for that, Ms. Evra. As she stated, I'm Jessee Espinosa, longtime Mercedian, spent my life here. I go to UC Merced, and I currently work at the Community Engagement Center at UC Merced, and it follows a similar goal that Ms. Broadley was talking about in connecting the UC to the broader community of Merced. And I work with Vernette there under Vernette's supervision. And I also am really involved in our community in the education movement, trying to improve education for Mercedians and making sure that the students who grow up here have the most amount of opportunity as possible. I also want to just real quick add in there to apologize if there's any background noise. I'm on the move right now, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to be a part of this conversation and to really dig into it, because it's something we don't get to talk about that often. But I agree that what Ms. Thao was saying was that this is a crucial time, and we're seeing, you know, the pandemic shifted a lot of things, and now we're trying to come back to the way it was. And in doing that, it's kind of a rebirth, and we can find where we want to improve and where we want to make sure our values stand up. And so that's kind of why I'm here and how I've been involved. And I just want to thank you guys for the invitation, and I'm excited for our discussion today.
Thank you all. As I mentioned, you all have been doing so much great work, right? Mindy, you've worked for some really amazing organizations and have done great work as past president of University Friends Circle, also known as UFC, right? Chia is doing incredible research. You should really check out her bio in the community here in Central Valley. And then Jessee, you know, an elected member of the community. He didn't wait until he graduated. He said, I'm gonna get involved in an elected position now, right? We don't need to wait to be the leaders of tomorrow. We are the leaders of today. So I'm really excited. And, you know, Vernette and I are super excited because all three of you are super involved in the community, but in different ways, right? And have very different experiences. And so this first question I want to ask to get the conversation started is a question to all three of you. Now, intergenerational, it's a word, it's an adjective, it's defined by the following: related to, affecting, or involving several generations, right? In this conversation, we're gonna really focus on that involving piece, right? Involving several generations, learning from several generations. And so this question, and again, we are talking about community leadership, right? This question is, why is it important for leaders to learn from leaders of other generations? And if you have an example of something you learned from a leader of another generation, we'd also love to hear that. And again, I'd love for all of our panelists to answer this question, and we'll go in the same order. So we'll have Chia share her thoughts first.
Thank you, Jess. That is a very important question. And I love that question because I grew up in a culture where I'm from the Hmong community, and I grew up in a culture where everything is shared orally from generation to generation, and that's how we maintain informations, right? But we're now in a country where, you know, there's so much knowledge out there in the communities, but mainly are produced and by our leaders who had been ahead of us, and there is a amount of knowledge that are out in the community that are produced by our previous leaders who are so much beneficial to the current and can be and will be to the next generation. So there's so much asset in the process of intergenerations knowledge, because something that we only benefit from sharing knowledge and informations, and I like to refer that to my research, and that, you know, because I work specifically with Hmong farmers, and what I really learned through my research is that, you know, the oral knowledge of they share informations of what they learn from their parents, and that practice live on through them, and then to the next generation they taught that to their kids, and that's how informations are maintained. It's because, you know, we learn from our previous generations and then pass it on to the next generations. And so there's so much asset in this knowledge or information sharing from generation to generations, and I think that it's only to our benefit if we have a way of really maximize this process of information sharing.
Thank you so much, Jane. You make a good point, right, of the importance of intergenerational communication, right? Because a lot of what we learn, a lot of knowledge, a lot of leadership development, and a lot of cultural transfer, right, happens through oral communication, right? Oral transfer. It's not always written down neatly in a book, which really highlights the importance of intergenerational communication as well. So thank you for sharing that. Mindy, what are your thoughts on the importance of leaders learning from leaders from other generations?
Well, I'm gonna liken my experiences to the way that Chia talked about oral communication. My career has been spent using music to connect with people, and music is a super tool, because whether we are young or old or rich or poor, it doesn't matter. Whether we're from this culture or another, somehow music is a universal language that offers a connection for us. So in my career, that was the tool that I used, and it creates a level of understanding among people. You turn music on, people kind of all start moving. They all start doing their own thing, but they bring themselves, and the barriers kind of come down. The same thing, ironically, is what happens in a community. A community needs to find a common culture and needs to create that common culture in order to build community around them. And in our case, what UC Merced has done for Merced is given us that link to the young and old, the rich and poor, every culture coming together, and we have a common purpose. So to me, I liken communication and learning from each other to anything that can sort of build and add a culture and create a culture that we all can participate in. So I don't even equate it to multi-generational. I equate it to sort of everybody in the room is a part of our culture.
Wow, I really love that. And that is such a good point, that music, right, has this beautiful way of connecting us. You might, even if it's a language you don't necessarily understand, you might not know the words, but somehow music has a way of transcending that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Jessee, I'd love to hear from you on your perspective on the importance of leaders learning from leaders of other generations.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to build off of what Ms. Thao said, and she mentioned that how important it is that we learn from other generations, and I think that's just super true. And it's so important that I think it's not just that we can learn from other generations, but that we have to and we must do it. I think that it's what makes us human and what makes humans just strong in general and prevailing throughout time. I know we learned, you know, at UC Merced, I've learned a theory called the ratchet effect, which states that the reason why humans have become, you know, such evolved creatures is because we're able to pass on ideas onto future generations. We're the only animals that builds onto improvements, makes improvements onto improvements. Like a beaver can make a dam, but that's all a beaver does. And the beaver doesn't learn how to make better dams necessarily, or can pass that information on to their children. But, you know, enabled through language and literature and books, we're able to pass on that knowledge and make improvements onto other improvements. And I think that it shows the power of being able to build off of what previous generations have built up for us and taken in the value, but also really emphasizes how crucial it is that the young generation has new ideas and brings new ideas to the table, because those are what's going to evolve the ideas and make them better than what they were before. And so you kind of rely on previous generations to build you up that stable grounding, for you to then build up a little more to pass it on to an even more stable grounding for the next generation. So I think it's just crucially important that we continue to do that.
Thank you for sharing that, Jessee, right? I want to repeat something you said right at the beginning, right? It's not that we can learn from other generations, it's that we must, right? Thank you for sharing that. So for all of those listening in, all of our audience members, please know that we will be taking Q&A questions throughout the entire conversation. So feel free at any point, if you have a question, we encourage you to drop in the chat now so we can make sure we get to it. I'm sorry, drop it in the Q&A. Now, if you do drop in the chat, I'm sure we'll catch it. But feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A and we will get to those throughout this conversation. So now this next question, I'm going to throw it out there to all of our panelists. Not everyone has to answer, but of course, if you want to, we would love to hear your thoughts. So this question is, and it's a question I think sometimes, you know, we probably can't cover the full answer, right, in just this short amount of time, but how do we balance, and this is something I think Jessee just kind of touched on a bit, but how do we balance, right, traditions and learned knowledge from, you know, we say that learning from experience is so important, and it is very true, right? But how do we balance keeping traditions, maintaining traditions, learning from experience with new perspectives, new ideas? How do we kind of manage both, right? Because they're both very important. There's only one today. There's only one, state in the community, right? So how do we balance both of those? And if you have any examples of how you've had to kind of deal with that challenge, right, we'd love to hear.
Well, I'll speak as the one probably representing the older generation. The traditions that we love, the traditions that work for us are more than just traditions. They're not just there because, oh, well, we've always done it this way, we should do it this way. They're important because they work. They're important because they resonate with whomever it is that's recreating them or reliving them or passing them on. Traditions that don't add value really aren't of any value anymore, and therefore aren't necessarily things that we want to continue to bring forward. Where it becomes so important to really listen and learn from each other is, again, I'm going to go back to the language of what connects us. You know, when I started my career, and actually quite a lot of decades through my career, we didn't have the technology that we have today. I didn't become fluent in it, if you will. And so it's incredibly important to me to learn from people whose second language is technology. And that's definitely a generation that's not my own. And is that, sorry, getting rid of that. And so, you know, to me, when we talk about what's important about carrying on a tradition, or whether or not traditions have value, or listening to a new way to do things. There's a new language with each generation. There's a new perspective. There's a new frame of reference. Yes, I've lived and worked and traveled all over the world, and that gives me cultural perspective, but it gives me cultural perspective in the context of the decades that I was there. It's terribly different today. So we need to keep relevant and current by hearing each other. Doesn't mean to say that that 40 years ago, something I experienced isn't still, or couldn't still be of value if it adds value. So we kind of have to, case by case, listen to each other and see what we want to keep.
Yes, 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 yes to all of that. What you said makes me think of something that Vernette was talking about actually earlier today, the importance of humility, right? The importance of being humble. And I think you really need that for leadership and for community engagement, because sometimes, right, and that's every generation, sometimes something that it's always been that way, or something that was a great idea, then maybe tomorrow, it doesn't have to take a whole generation, maybe tomorrow is not a great idea anymore. We have to use our humility to acknowledge that and realize that sometimes it means tweaking an idea or kind of just dropping it, because like you said, Mindy, it might not necessarily add value. I wanted to see if anyone else wanted to touch on that question before we take a question from our audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to add a little bit in terms of research, right? We know that through research, we always learn something new all the time. And it is so important that we adapt our learning, right? That theories can change, and that, we could take what we had learned and adapt that to the new learning or discovery. So I think that there's so much beautifications and validations to just adapting and learning, from the foundations. And I think that's how we evolve, and that's how we grow, and that's how we can better our science, our technologies, and it's all because we are able to, add new values, add new perspective, add new learnings and findings to our current research. And so I think that there's so much value in that learning process.
Thank you for sharing, right? Lifelong learning, right? It's so important for leadership. It's so important for community engagement, right? Something my colleague Burnett says all the time. She said it this morning, right? Engaging in the community means more listening, right? And learning than we like to think, right? Engaging in the community means more listening and learning than we like to think. And what you just touched on, Chia, was about lifelong learning. We're all learning together, and technology just keeps throwing more things at us, I think at a faster pace now. So we literally are all learning together all the time. Now we have a few questions in the chat, so I'm excited to get to them.
If actually I could go to that real fast. I just want to add on to that.
Yeah.
Because I think this thought, it gets to the core of what I think we're talking about here. It is, there's this conflicting pull between young people, the idea that young people are inexperienced, and then older people are resistant to change. And these kind of ideas meet head to head. And like you said, I love the way you phrased it, is we only have one today. And somehow we have to merge, all these ideas into today and make one singular today. And I heard a story, and I think this is just a great way to visualize the way that this is done. So if you're, say, like a DJ at a wedding, and the floor is getting kind of quiet and there's not very many people on it, what's a way to shake it up? Throw on a remix, because the older people will recognize the classic, the song, and it'll pull them on, while the younger people will hear the new tunes, the new variations, and that'll excite them. So you find a way to kind of get that middle ground where it excites both crowds, and then you get more action in it. And I think that that's the essence of what we have to do, is we have to take in the old with the new, while affirming the value of the past, while also affirming the value of growth, and realizing that if we stay stagnant, then we're like the beaver, we're never evolving. And to recognize that there's room for growth, I think lifelong learners, we're all just the human race. We're all a singular entity trying to learn, trying to improve, and we can share and utilize those resources. Like, for example, like my generation, is not, like you, Miss Broadley said, she wasn't very tech savvy. Well, my generation is not the generation that built the iPhone. My generation is just the one that was given it to it, given it to us, and now we have the responsibility to utilize it to find a way to make a better tool for the next generation. And you know, maybe when we get to that generation, we won't understand what they're, how do you do this touch screen? Is it a hologram? Like, what do you, I don't, you know, I just think that, you know, we can remix and find ways to affirm the old while moving forward with the new.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Oh my God, I love that analogy of the remix. But you know, your analogy also makes me think of, you know when that song comes on and maybe it's a song and half the audience wasn't even born when it came out, but everyone knows the song, and it's not a remix, it's the original. And everyone goes on the dance floor and everyone's dancing. And I look at my little cousins and I'll say, you weren't even born yet. What do you know about this song? But they know it. And I think that speaks to what Mindy talked about, which is the fact that if it adds value, it will last, right? We don't want to get rid of something just because we've been doing it, but we also don't want to do anything just because we've been doing it, right? But if it adds value, so that's what I love, the case by case that Mindy, you touched on. It really touches on that point. So sometimes the traditional song, there isn't a remix and people still love it. But I do love, you know, some of these remixes I think are amazing. So that also touches on collaboration, right? Like one generation collaborating with the talent and that was produced by a different generation, putting it together, right? And then also touches on lifelong learning, because we can learn, right, what Chia said, we can learn songs even if, you know, they were quote unquote before our time, right? Because as Mindy said, some music is timeless. So I want to get to this great question. We have a few great questions in the chat, but the first question that came up is, what is the best piece of advice that you learned from another leader that you still reflect on and utilize today?
I'll go first. For me, something that really changed me, it's and what I had learned from a past mentor, it's that when you don't know something, you have to be willing to ask for questions and seek answer. And that really had changed me, because for me, I grew up in a family where it's better for me to take information, and it's and asking question, it's something that I had to train myself to ask critical questions, right? But you know what, it make all the difference, right? Because we don't always have the answer to everything. And so for me, it's, you know, if you don't know something, ask question. There's a lot of knowledge out there.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it.
All right, I've got one.
Yeah.
And you might recognize the name General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was our general for the first Desert Storm. When he retired, he started speaking to conferences and corporations and things like that. I was fortunate enough to hear him speak. And one of the things that I thought was really such an interesting perspective as a leader. Here's this guy, he's a serious leader, right? He's the general of our troops. And he says, you know, just because you're the leader doesn't mean you have all the answers, but you are called upon to set us into motion. You are called upon to lead us. So sometimes he would make a decision. He'd bring all of the people in the room, all of his lieutenants and so forth in the room. And then he would make a decision whether he knew where it was going to lead or not. He would make a decision because once the leader puts something on the table, it creates a great opportunity for conversation and connection. And all you have to do is say, folks, I think we need to head north. And guess what? The really talented, smart thinking people in the room will say, north? Okay, well, I can see why you would say that, but what about east? What about west? What about south? And all of a sudden you get their perspective and you get the room igniting and collaborating. So it's not about, Chia, to your point, it's not about having all the answers as a leader. It's about setting a scene and creating an environment in a space where people are comfortable to add their perspective, because in that, those little nuggets of knowledge and wisdom and differences from where you see things to where I see things, that's where we get a full picture. Leadership is about bringing out the leaders in the room. And sometimes it's not because you had the correct direction, it's that you set it into motion.
I don't really want to try to follow that up, but I just, I was trying to think, and it's hard to think of a piece of advice is like the best, because everything I've learned from other generations. I would say one of the pieces of advice that I think inspires me is it's along the lines of one of my first mentors. He was a real big fan of the law of attraction, and a lot of different movies, a lot of different quotes, a lot of different people talk about this idea in different ways, and it's the idea that if you set your mind to something and you work towards it with your whole heart, with your whole passion, things start to align to it, and the energy in the environment itself will kind of align. And I think it's along the lines of it's a people's world, and I think the more you interact with people, the kind of easier it is to get things done. And if you have large ambitions to try to do something good, it's going to take a lot of people to get it done that know. All right, here it is. It's this is the same idea in another quote. The idea is, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's just the essence of even what we're talking about today.
Love it. That is an African proverb. It's one of my favorites. I love that you just mentioned that. So my next question, I would love for either Mindy or Jessee to answer. And then there's a question specifically for you, Chia, in the chat. I don't know if you see it, but I would love if you'd be okay answering that after. For either Mindy or Jessee, how do you navigate through difficult conversations when generational perspectives don't match up? Can you provide an example of a time where you faced this challenge? And that question came from Diana. Thank you, Diana, for the question.
Yeah, actually, I'll go first on this one. So 2 examples come to mind immediately. Is I'm a Democrat in an all Republican household, and I live with a lot of older people, and so there's a difference of opinion usually. But what I found is that living situation has helped me find ways to have discussions with people you don't always agree with. And I think what I've also learned is that you don't need to agree with the person in order to have a good conversation with them. In fact, that discourse is actually where the fruit is, and where you're going to expand. I think the key of it is to have an open mind. And I think that's a little stereotypical, but I think it's super true. Like, I think everyone it gets into it's hard to see where our own faults are, but if we have the mindset that we don't have the answers, let's ask questions, let's see if they say something that we disagree with, how do we interact with that to find, well, where's their reasoning in this, as opposed to just thinking they're wrong. And an example of times this happened is I serve on the board for Merced City, and just a recent example, there was a literature backpack proposal being pushed across the table, where there was going to be backpacks given to each of the children, and there's literature inside. Well, my mind was really focused on the environmental impact of what this was going to do, producing 11,000 plastic backpacks, while other people on the board were kind of concerned about the fiscal impact of not doing this would have onto our families, because they're looking at this, well, look at the economy's not doing good, people don't have a lot of money, we need to make sure that our students have the resources they need. And then kind of battling this ecology idea, and trying to find ways where it's like, well, the truth is we're both right. We're both right in our own ways. So what's a way that we can try to merge that? Neither one's wrong. And you try to, I think we ended up doing where there was a different type of bag to fit the same resources. So you are able to include multiple perspectives in the singular conversation. I think that's probably where it's at, is you realizing that there's not just one right answer, there's multiple viewpoints that are all equally as valid.
Thank you for sharing that. You make a good point, right? There's often multiple solutions, and how do we engage in the solution that is going to account for the least amount of costs, right? That doesn't add more. problems into the community, but actually solves more problems than adding costs. So really great example, really, really great example.
Jessee, I think it's the definitive answer, which is that there is never one right answer. There is never one perspective. There is never one, even one perspective in a generation. So even though we're speaking multi-generational, in your same generation or in my same generation, we're not all the same person, are we? I mean, I can be speaking with someone exactly of my era and upbringing, and maybe we were even in the same school or whatever. We have different points of view and frames of mind. The point of communication and the point of working together is to actually hear those and learn, because there isn't just one. It's like looking at an elephant and trying to describe it. If you're standing at the tail, you're going to tell me it's like a rope, and if you're standing at the front, you're going to say it's much more like a hose. And if I'm standing by the leg, it's a tree trunk. None of us are wrong, but none of us are seeing the whole elephant. The only way we can see the whole elephant is if we all put it all together and try and see how that fits. So I totally get what you're saying. And that, to me, I think is another, from a generational perspective, I can tell you that the older I get, the more I appreciate and understand that I don't have the answer. Not in a bad way, like I don't know, but that there isn't one answer to anything.
I 100% agree, right? The older I get, I'm just like, you realize how much you don't know, and you're more accepting of the fact that, it's okay that I don't know everything. And that's why we have a community and different perspectives. And thank you for mentioning the important fact that even within generations, there's lots of diversity and different experiences. So none of our panelists are trying to speak for their entire generation. So I just want to highlight that. So thank you for bringing that up, Mindy. So now, Chia, there's a question from Austin John for you specifically. If you're okay answering this, how do you reach out to the younger Hmong community to pass stories that carry important cultural and historical information? And how do you get the community members involved in your work with the elder abuse services? And the lessons you learned in your study about farm practices and pesticide use in Hmong farmers. So there's a lot in that question. So feel free to answer the parts that really speak to you.
So maybe let me focus there. All of those different parts are so important, and I think I could spend a whole day really talking about each of it, or answering all those questions. But I think what I want to answer is, how do we, bridge this gap or tap onto these multi-generationals of our elders in our generations to the younger generation that will be coming up. For the Hmong cultures and community here in the United States, we are in this melting pot of different generations, right? We have our elders and our parents who grew up in a time where they're farmers, and then they become soldiers overnight, and then become political refugee where our parents are born, and then they have us, and then now we're here in a country where we know nothing about, and then we're learning. Our parents, so we're growing up in a country where it's different from our parents' view, and then now we have kids, and our kids are learning from us, right? So we are basically all over the place in a very short period of time, from transit from place to place, and displace and discourse, and so there's so much that is going on within our communities, and at one point we are questioning, will our generation be able to pass on what we learned from our parents to the younger generations, or to our kids who grew up pretty much in America, who have no knowledge or ideas of what our parents go through in refugee camps, or what their parents go through, escaping the wars or from their home countries, right? So there's so much in such a short period of time that we're not able to process everything all. However, I would have to say that we are fortunate to grow up in a country where we have the privilege of learning, right? You know, that nobody limit our abilities to learn. And so I think that there are so much need to really, you know, pass on these incredible stories. And it's something that our cultures are really good at, especially our parents. It's the oral pass on or sharing the informations of their life stories, of their, you know, cultures and traditions back in their home countries. And they have, and you, because that is what they're good at, you know. And in our culture, you know, we're a really oral communities, and everything is learned by sharing teachings on to the next generations. And I think that our generation will be that generation to pass on that knowledge that we learn from our parents to the next generation. And it's up to us and to really make sure that we're successful in passing on those message and knowledge to the next generation. So I would encourage that we and I always say this, you know, we need more scholars, right? We need more, and of course you don't have to be Hmong to be a Hmong scholars, right? But we need more scholars to really learn about this importance of oral sharing and information, and to pass on that on. And I would also have to say that because we grew up in a country where we're free to learn, so we also have opportunity to engage our younger generations. And so I only see, you know, opportunity in our work in terms of engaging the next generations, and at the same time keep what we learned from our parents. And so how do we do that, right? So there's a lot of space to really learn and navigate. And we're really new. We're only been to this country for no more than 50 years. So there's so much learning and also so much value from our elders and knowledge that are still here that can still be passed on.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you make a good point about like whose responsibility is it, right? To teach, to learn. And it makes me think about the fact that it is not just one generation's responsibility to teach the next generation, but it's also every generation's responsibility to like learn from all the generations, right? We have to, it's our responsibility to learn from each other, just as is our responsibility to help teach each other. So thank you so much for sharing that. So we have quite a few questions in the chat. I don't believe we're gonna be, I'm sorry, in the Q&A. I don't believe we'll be able to get to all of them. What I would love for us to do is, I would love to hear some final thoughts from each of our panelists, and please, no pressure. We don't expect you to share your best piece of wisdom, but just some final thoughts regarding the importance of intergenerational communication, intergenerational leadership, and specifically in the community. And then if our panelists are okay, if you can drop your either your LinkedIn or your email, if you have any social media that that are public that you'd like people to follow to connect with you, if you could drop that in the chat, that way those who didn't have their questions answered can potentially reach out to you directly if you are all okay with that. So with that, we can keep the same order we did last time, which would be Chia, Mindy, and Jessee. Some final thoughts about the importance of intergenerational communication, intergenerational learning when it comes to community leadership.
Yes, I think it's so important. It is so important to make sure that we engage every generations in terms of, learning the different knowledge from cross generations. As I mentioned before, there's so much asset in this process of learning. And so it's only to our benefit to really tap onto this pipeline of informations that are that we can learn from our elders to our generation, and then pass that on. So I think there's so much knowledge in terms of the flow of informations, and it's only to our benefit to really optimize this opportunities, especially we live in a society where we're so connected by technology. We're so connected by the advancements and informations that are out there. And so I think that it's so important. It's so important for leaders to adapt and to know that it is we can bridge each other, the gap between each other.
I'm unmuted. Okay. I'm listening to everyone speak, and I'm reading these questions, and I keep getting the same thing through my head, which is we all want the same thing. We may come from it from a different perspective. We may have different words for it. Some people call it volunteerism. Some people call it fellowship. Some people call it connecting in your community, whatever it is. But that is a multi-generational tradition going all the way back to the cavemen. You had to work together in order to achieve anything. And so I guess my thinking is that if we can always remain as open as Jessee is right now, he's a student, and Chia is a student. If we can always be a student, no matter at what stage we are in our lives, in our evolution of our careers, but always approach it like it's class. What can I learn? Take notes, work with friends, form study groups, listen to each other, go to office hours. In real life, it's the same. It doesn't change once you graduate. It doesn't change once you are the leader. Be open to learning from everyone. That's how you cram for the test, and the test, you never know when it's going to be. So it's every day out here. But that to me, that's the takeaway is stay open to learning, and there won't be difficult conversations if your mindset is to learn. Then you're not the outcast in your thinking. You're not challenging or having to find your way in. It's welcomed if the people around you know that that's your perspective and that's why you're offering your information.
I'll go ahead. I don't know if I have much to add on to that. I think we've developed the idea throughout this conversation that intergenerational leadership is not an obstacle to overcome, but rather an opportunity to evolve. I think it's been our superpower since the dawn of humanity, and I think that present day humans have such a huge opportunity to utilize that due to extended life expectancy of humans, as well as a lot longer or later retirement ages and early into the workforce. We have 5 generations working in the current workforce, from traditionalists down to Gen Z, and that's more generations than ever happened throughout the history of humankind. So with continuing with that same brain process, I view that as this means that we have the most opportunity for growth and evolution than any set of humans has ever had in the history of humankind. So with that, I just want to say thank you for tuning in to everyone who saw our discussion and becoming aware for the potential for growth that we had. Like Ms. Broadley said, we have to be students our whole lives. And if we learn from everyone else, then no one knows more than we do. And we'll always be able to do the best that we can.
Thank you all. I want to kick it to Renette to see if she just wanted to say a few words of gratitude before we close up.
I'm just so impressed. I was soaking this in. There's so many of those nuggets of wisdom that I heard from everybody, but I think Jessee, I'm going to go away from this remembering that the remix is how to get everybody involved. I love it. And thank you all for taking the time out of your day to share with us, but to really share some, I think, really tangible ways to connect intergenerationally. And part of it, as I heard from all of you, is you almost forget about the generations. It's about learning from other people. So thank you for all of that. And again, for being willing to share this with all of us. I appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you so much to our incredible panelists. Mindy, Chia, Jessee. Thank you to the Community Engagement Center for co-sponsoring. Thank you to the amazing team at the Margo of Souza Student Leadership Center, including our Student Advisory Board, who helped us with the amazing questions that we had prepared. And thank you to everyone who asked the question. We didn't get to all of your questions, but please know that they did definitely help us in this conversation. And if you do want to connect with any of our panelists, they have informed me already that they would love to connect with anyone to follow up on these conversations. So we will be sending a follow-up email to all our attendees after this session. And as I mentioned before, this session will be recorded and uploaded, and we will also send that link to all attendees as well. Thank you all again for an incredible conversation. Thank you for your leadership in our community. You were all so busy, but you took time out of your last couple of weeks to prepare for this and to engage in this amazing conversation. And I am confident in saying that many of us learned so much from this conversation, and I will be rewatching this again to write down all the nuggets of knowledge. I am definitely inspired and grateful, and all of us in the Community Engagement Center and the Margo F. Souza Student Leadership Center are grateful for our dear, dear panelists. With that, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.